about halfway between Vegas and Salt Lake going through Beaver. It's pretty cold out. We're going between rain and snow. Basically, snow turns into water when it hits your windshield. The Jeep we're in is really heavy, and it's got a lot of stuff hanging off of it. You'll see that when we do our daylight drive. But it shows the versatility of this LT1 10-speed. This LT1 10-speed is pushing this heavy Jeep at mid-altitude. It's not high altitude. At near freezing temps, and it has no problem at all. We're not getting the best economy, as you could imagine, pushing all this weight and drag at 80 miles an hour through these temps, but we're getting over 10. I'm going to say we're getting 11 or 12. I'll be a little bit more accurate when I get to a gas station. We are in an early model JK with an LT1 10-speed, and we all know how awesome the LT1 10-speed is. So we're going to talk a little bit about this Jeep and accessories in general. This Jeep pretty much has as much, if not everything, you could put on a Jeep. Everything from this high lift jack, got lights everywhere, computers everywhere. This Jeep had a ton of interferences, and when we do a build, the swap usually goes pretty quick. On some builds like this one, the accessories and the interferences can take more time than the actual powertrain installation. This Jeep not only had a ton of interferences, additional wiring, but it also had frame rust and body rot, as you can see in these pictures. So we had to section the rear frame or body where the body mounts are, and that's usually where they rust. I'm not sure why, but around those rear body bolts is where we see rust most prevalent. So you might want to be preemptive on that, take them out and do some rust proofing. So really we spent more time on this build cleaning things up. And I want to mention that usually when you guys have air compressors, S-pods, rock lights, cameras, most of the time they're not done properly, or maybe they are done properly but the body wasn't off, so they couldn't route them the preferred way. So we end up having to go back and redo all that stuff because we don't want you to have a problem after the swap. And I don't think a lot of guys see the backside of that. They bring a Jeep in and want to get an engine conversion done quickly, but in a lot of cases it ends up being all these interferences take the extra time. Now a really clean JK with no mods goes really quick with us. My guys can actually get the engine out and in about 2 days, but that's not the whole story. Once the engine's in and running, the process then starts. We got to bleed the cooling system, fill the transmission, and in these 10L80s, it's not as easy as the old days. There is no dipstick tube, so there's a procedure you have to follow. I go out and I test drive it around the street, then I bring it back, they do an inspection, then I go out and drive it on the mountain, bring it back, do another inspection, and a lot of the times we find issues that aren't related to the swap. A lot of wiring related issues, clanks, clunks, vibrations, driveline problems, rear axles whining, front axles vibrating. So we try to address all those things before you get your Jeep back. And I will say that if you have aftermarket alarms, especially the kind that you cut and hack into the harness, you're not using a CAN-based alarm system, we see a high failure rate with those. Door locks don't work right, or there's a long pause before the engine starts. And we trace a lot of these issues down to these aftermarket alarm systems. Sometimes stereos too. A lot of you guys are installing aftermarket CAN-based stereos. For the most part they work well, but sometimes they cause issues. So here's my opinion on aftermarket stuff. If you need it, by all means get it. If you're a mall crawler and you're getting all this stuff just to look tough, well, I guess that'll work for you. However, if you want to get the most reliable JK, just get what you need. And most of us don't need a lot. I've worked on some of the highest profile JKs out there that run pretty hard off-road, and you'd be surprised how minimalistic a lot of these JKs are. Now if you have to have the dual air compressor and dual S-pods and rock lights all the way around and cameras and roof racks and high lift jacks and all sorts of electronic gizmos inside, do the installations clean. Have it done professionally. First thing my guys do when a Jeep comes in is they open the hood and they look at the wiring, and in a lot of cases it's just a mess and we know what's going to be in front of us. In other cases, when you open the hood and you see a stock powertrain with no mods, it's a sigh of relief. because we know that swap's going to go easy. So we've got a few in the shop right now that are really loaded up with accessories, and it's going to take longer to straighten those out than it is actually to do the swap. And I want to say that I've always told my customers that time is money and money is time. You give us the time, we clean up as much of this stuff as we can at no charge. But if you just have a massive amount of interferences and you're in a hurry, and then you're just going to have to pay to play. But if you give us the time, we are very generous. I do want to say a little about this LT1. I drove it to Park City and back for its road test, and it really shows the versatility of the LT1. It didn't struggle at all. At 80 miles an hour, even with all this drag, the LT1 didn't break a sweat. Yeah, it did downshift several times, but given the load and the freezing temperatures, it did pretty good. Mileage wasn't spectacular, if you can imagine. It was getting about 230 miles to a tank. I think I was averaging just over 12 miles to the gallon. I do tell guys that you should get the same or better than your V6, and in most cases that's true. The heavier the Jeep, usually the better you'll get, because the larger displacement engine has efficiencies over the smaller displacement engine. But you also have to set your JK up right, and that's important. If you've got 538s with 35-inch tires, because that's what it took to move your JK with a V6, and then you put that in a V8, you might not get better mileage. In fact, you might get worse, because these V8s have a lot of torque and they got long legs. They want to be loaded down. They want to be running at low RPM on the highway, but if you're screaming a V8 down the highway at 70 miles an hour at 2,700 RPM, you're probably going to have negative results compared to the V6. And it really is so important for any of these modern powertrains, not just GM, to set them up right. If you look at the modern GM vehicles and even the competitors, they're running really tall gears. And the reason they can get away with that is because of these high gear transmissions having ultra low first gears and then multiple overdrives, as well as technology that puts out a lot of engine torque. So they're keeping the engine in its power band, and the power delivery of the engine is a lot more efficient. I think you can see that a 6.2 liter engine with a 10-speed is going to be more efficient than a 3.8 liter engine with a 4-speed, which is what this vehicle came with. So keep your expectations realistic. You're not going to double your mileage with a V8. Another factor is how you drive. A lot of guys will have a V6 that'll barely go 75 miles an hour up the grade, and they'll get 12 miles to the gallon. Then they'll put a V8 in and it'll go 80 miles an hour up that grade, and they'll still get 12 miles to the gallon and say, well, I'm getting the same mileage. But you're really not, because you're going faster. You're accelerating faster. If you were to slow down and go the same speed as the V6, then you would see the gain. So expect similar mileage to the V6 if you're going to go faster, which most of us are, because the V6 is not exactly spectacular on the highway. We're finding with these LTs that tuning and setting them up is more critical than with the earlier powertrains. The LSs and the Hemis are more tolerant to not setting them up right. The Hemis especially, because they're speed density based, they don't have airflow meters. The GM systems are a little bit more sophisticated, running a mass airflow sensor along with a map sensor, and they're also running a humidity sensor in the new LTs. The end result is you can have finer fuel control, however it has to be implemented properly. The spark timing and the load on the engine is super critical. If you load an LT just right, you're going to get really good economy and performance. If you spin it up like I said, the results won't be that great. So setting an LT up properly and loading it properly is really the key to get the most out of your LT engine. One of the great things about the Wrangler today is what's available for it. Pretty much anything you want, everything from a dead pedal on the floor to a camper that bolts onto your roof to a porta potty that goes into your trailer hitch. Anything you want for your Wrangler is available. What you don't want to do is make your Jeep less reliable because you've hacked into it to put in all sorts of gizmos and gadgets, and we definitely see a higher failure rate with aftermarket accessories than we do with the OE components. As far as light bars and high lift jacks and all this stuff that people hang off their Jeeps, get what you need. I've seen Jeeps with 10, 12, 14 lights, and if you really need that, that's fine. If you don't, all you're doing is creating aerodynamic drag. Light bars especially have a tendency to whistle and whine, and that can be very annoying. They also tend to come loose off-road, so be careful with that. This particular Jeep has a lot of stuff in front of the grille. It's got a hoop, lights, and other things, and while it didn't overheat, it definitely ran warmer than I would have liked it to. We were only 40, 50 degrees on the highway, and I was pushing 215 to 220 degrees, and that tells me cooling fan wasn't on, of course, because it doesn't usually come on until about 225. But with enough natural airflow, I should have been staying down about 200 degrees. What that tells me is this customer may have a problem with cooling in the summer when things warm up. But he has the opportunity now of clearing that grill, getting some natural airflow into the grill, and reducing the load on the fan. So we're going to hit the road with this LT1 10-speed JK, and we'll see you soon.